and the India Habitat Center for the lecture this evening, which is the fifth actually in the series that we have done on the Indian modern and Nehru. Today's speaker, very well known, is Professor Akeel Bilgrami. He's the Sidney Morgan Besser Professor of Philosophy at Columbia University in New York, and also the director of the South Asia Institute. Chairing today's session is Professor Kumkum Sangari, who's the William F. Vilas Professor of English and the Humanities at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. Both Professor Bilgrami and Professor Sangari have authored many books, many papers, and I'm not going to list all of them. Many of you are probably familiar with that. The subject of Akeel's lecture today is Nehru and the concept of secularism. And with that, I hand over to Kumkum.
My pleasure to be here today and to be a part of this. Pleasure to be here as part of this series and to look graceful and listen carefully to Akeel's lecture. I think that those of you who attended earlier parts of this series will probably see the sequence in which it's assembled, but I won't take up any of Akeel's time and ask him to start.
I was saying it's an honor to speak in this series on Nehru and the Indian modern. Thank you for asking me. Societies and polities, for all their material underpinnings, are understood, described, and navigated by concepts. Concepts are expressed in words, and words are supposed to have definitions. But words which do have definitions in any strict sense tend to express only trivial concepts. As Socrates said at the end of his life, the only concept that he'd succeeded in defining in all those menacing, browbeating conversations he had with other Athenian citizens was the one expressed by the Greek word for what in English we call mud, which, in case any of you are interested, he defined as the mixture of soil and water. Beyond that, he said he had not succeeded in defining anything. This is not just a flamboyant form of modesty on his part. I reckon what he really meant was that concepts have a history, and when the concepts in question are non-trivial, that history is fraught with conflicting claimants, with diverse interests, and above all, diverse inferential links to other concepts that themselves turn on a differential field of beliefs and doctrines. So just to take a relatively simple example, the Greek term demokratia is related to our concept of democracy via differential relations of influence to the notion of citizenship, because that notion in turn is determined by whether or not slaves exist in the society and whether or not women are considered to be citizens. The term secularism is no exception to this messy philological genealogy that frustrates the task of defining it. Our own intense recent discussions of secularism in India are very much a product of the history of internal developments within the long and fantastically creative period of the freedom movement, and since the history of that movement was itself braided with the history of the colonial masters from whom freedom was being sought, the conceptual history of secularism derives in part from British history and more generally from the history of the rise of nations in the European continent. I will return to some of those details in a moment, but I'll say all this at the outset by way of saying that we cannot just stipulate that the term secularism means this or that thing. We must expend a lot of effort to show that any such stipulation is not arbitrary. And to do that, we have to follow the demands both of theoretical analysis as well as history.